Hi, I'm Mary, a librarian and book reviewer with a focus on stories written for kids, tweens, and teens. Today, I get to share with you this book called I'll Stop the World by Lauren Towman. This is the story of a boy named Justin who is a teenager in the present day, and his life is not exactly what he'd like for it to be. School life, not so good. Home life, also not so good. He has never met his grandparents. They died before he was born, and he just wishes a lot of things were different. So he goes to a bonfire in town one night and does a little bit of drinking. And when he gets in the car and goes over a bridge on the way home while it's raining, something happens that causes him to go back in time to 1985, a week before his grandparents' death. So he needs to figure out exactly why he's back in 1985, if he can do anything about what happened to his grandparents, and learn a little bit about himself and others along the way. This story is a really fascinating look not only at human emotions and involvement, but also time travel. So examining what things were like in the 1980s versus today, and how those two things might coincide or not once they're connected to one another. So at the beginning of the book, you don't really know what is going to be happening. You get to know all of the characters in their own time, but without the time being mentioned. So it kind of gives you a sense of those characters in a timeless kind of moment. So then as they kind of merge together, then you start seeing some things that maybe start to alert you to the fact that they are from slightly different times. This is written for a young adult audience, so there are conversations of underage drinking, romance, some violence, bullying, things like that. So there are some pretty complex and hard-hitting subject matter moments within this book. But in that, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of the emotions that people feel, especially at this time in their lives as they're transitioning from children to adults, going from friendship with others to more than friendship, some LGBTQIA identities in here as well, and when that sometimes is acceptable and sometimes not in one's environment, as well as some racial disparities as well. So again, a lot of hard-hitting content in here. Something that's interesting is that it goes back and forth from one character to another, so it really jumps around. You get to know a lot of what's happening within each character's minds, and the chapters are relatively short. So the text itself is pretty small. There's also not a lot of white space, but because the chapters are short, it really helps the story move forward. And even though it is a time travel focused story, really it hits on those human emotions more than anything else. So it's not tremendously driven by action. It's mostly driven by internal conflict resolution, investigation, and that kind of thing. So for those young adult readers who like to get into those stories about people and why they do what they do, how they relate to one another, and how they grow, this is a really fascinating story, especially with its intentional design. So it's one that will keep you guessing, keep you thinking as you're going through. And there are some moments in here where there's potentially some anachronistic elements as far as the language and jargon people are using, currency, things like that. But for the most part, you'll find that a lot of these human emotions are pretty universal, no matter whether you're in 1985 or the present. And yes, this song does get stuck in your head every time you see the title of this book. If this sounds like a great fit for you and something that you're intrigued to be reading more about, I hope you look for it at your favorite bookstore.